The name The Cramps doesn't whisper. It clenches. It jolts. It sounds like something your body does when things get too intense, when energy, pain, and pleasure all hit at once. For a band that made its name fusing punk fury, rockabilly sleaze, and B-movie horror into something entirely its own, the name was never meant to be beautiful. It was meant to be felt. When Eric Perkhiser and Christy Wallace began shaping what would become the Cramps in the mid-1970s, they were living at the crossroads of the underground, part CBGB-era punk explosion, part retro revival, part midnight movie subculture. They shared an obsession with 1950s kitsch, drive-in horror flicks, pulp erotica, and outsider art, all the stuff that mainstream America tried to bury. Out of that mix came not just a sound, but a worldview. Distorted, campy, dangerous, and defiantly alive. They reinvented themselves as Lux Interior and Poison Ivy, names that sounded ripped from a comic book or a graveyard marquee, and their band needed something to match that raw, theatrical energy. The Cramps was it. The word itself was ugly, visceral, and impossible to ignore. It conjured up something physical, the body in revolt, a spasm, a jolt, a perfect metaphor for their music. This wasn't a name about coolness or style. It was about shock and sensation. In an era when punk bands were competing to sound tougher, grosser, or more confrontational, the Cramps stood out precisely because it sounded uncomfortable. It hurt a little to say. Some stories suggest that Lux chose the name for its sheer offensiveness, its rejection of polish. A cramp is something raw and involuntary, a tightening you can't control. That perfectly mirrored their live shows, sweaty, chaotic, sexual, unhinged. The name wasn't designed to be clever or symbolic. It was an anti-name, a piece of bodily slang that carried the grit and sleaze of the underground they loved. As the Cramps began haunting stages in New York's punk haunts, CBGB, Max's Kansas City, the Pyramid Club, the name became their flag. In a sea of the somethings and the whatevers, the Cramps sounded dirty, dangerous, and alive. It promised something you wouldn't find on radio or TV, something twitching under the floorboards. Their fusion of early rock and roll, surf guitar, and psychotic garage punk, soon labeled Psychobilly, found its perfect visual counterpart in a name that made people squirm before they even heard a note. Their albums, Songs the Lord Taught Us, 1980, Psychedelic Jungle, 1981, A Date with Elvis, 1986, Stay Sick, 1990, expanded on the mythology that their name implied. Each one pulsed with lust, menace, and humor, like the soundtrack to a cult horror flick playing in a seedy midnight theater. The name The Cramps became shorthand for their aesthetic, the beautiful collision of rock and roll and the grotesque, where danger and camp waltzed hand in hand. Over time, the word took on even deeper resonance. It wasn't just about pain or tension. It was about compression, all of rock's history. Blues, garage, surf, punk, twisted together until it spasmed into something new. The Cramps wasn't just a title. It was an act of sonic and cultural pressure, squeezing decades of forbidden sound into one wild scream. In the end, the naming of the Cramps was pure genius in its simplicity. It didn't need explanation or mythology. It worked because it felt wrong. And that wrongness was exactly right. It was ugly, funny, sexy, and a little bit sick. Just like the band. They weren't here to soothe. They were here to twitch, to convulse, to electrify. And so the name that once just sounded shocking became prophetic. The Cramps didn't just play rock and roll. They embodied it at its most primal. Loud, lusty, and gloriously alive in its discomfort.